Welcome, thinkers, to Season 4, Episode 11 of Thinking Critically. The only announcement I have this week is I will be debuting a new Twitch overlay for my live-streamed homebrew campaign, which goes approximately every other Tuesday around 8 p.m. UK time. But yeah, we've gone from completely nothing, just the raw Discord output, to having like graphics and a square for each of the characters and stuff. So if you want to check out that completely homemade thing, tune in to twitch.tv/thinkingcritically this Tuesday. Otherwise, let's get on with the show. And today I'm joined by Cyle Durkee. Thank you ever so much for joining us today, Cyle. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, that seems like a very personal question. How very rude of you.
Tell us a lot about yourself.
Absolutely. I'm Cyle. I am the Forever DM over at Planar Allies. I am the project manager of the Rolling Together stream team, and I'm the co-founder for the Foundation for Inclusivity in Gaming. You can find all of these things and more over at our, if you check out our Twitter bio, it has a link tree in it over at ALLIESNERD, at Allies Nerd. You can find all those things, and I'll certainly plug all of them at the end when we do this again.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Today's topic is quality. So what does that mean to you in the D&D and wider TTRPG framework?
Well, I think that quality always starts with the question of what rubric you're using. Is it the quality of the game? Is it the quality of the participation? Is it the quality of the material, of the performance, like all that kind of stuff? And I think when you're dealing with something as broad as the concept of quality, the very first thing that you have to talk about is the quality of the people that are participating.
Ooh.
And I think that that is something that a lot of people don't really like to dwell on in a lot of situations, because it forces us to look at ourselves and all of the little foibles that we have.
I don't know what you're talking about. I haven't got any. So that's
right,
fine.
Exactly. and nobody who's listening to this has any issues at all. So no, I think that it's an important part of life, and I think that it's an important part of what Dungeons and Dragons is and what role-playing games in general are. Is it's an opportunity for you to create this character and go and live out amazing fantasies doing all kinds of stuff. You know, if you're talking D&D, it's normally saving something, finding something, beating up a monster, saving the world. There's all kinds of other TTRPGs out there that are very, very different, where the goals are just, are markedly dissimilar to Dungeons and Dragons. It just happens to hold like a 90% market share. So, but the beautiful thing about that is that we all bring little bits of ourselves to our characters. And one of the things that your characters can tell you, if you look at what happens to them over time, is what qualities you actually hold as a person. There are very few of us that can actually go into a character that has literally nothing to do with us and never will, and is no reflection of us at all, even slightly. There's, for the vast majority of people, it is, you're going to put little parts of yourself in there. And those parts are going to grow and expand over time. And I think that that is where quality starts, is the quality of introspection and understanding, the quality essentially of self-empathy, that you understand who you are. That's where, I think personally, that's where a quality human being begins. It's somebody who is courageous enough to look at themselves honestly and is kind enough to deal with themselves the same way they would deal with a friend who was in the same position, essentially.
We've really like this is some deep stuff now. That we're not even 5 minutes in.
Yeah, I don't do small talk.
for something like quality, it's like, oh, what makes a good game? Oh, a game where everyone has fun. No, none of that stuff. We are straight into the psychoanalysis.
Yeah,
okay,
absolutely.
cool. Right, let me. It's quite scary, isn't it, when you think about it like that? Like, I absolutely agree that most, if not all, characters will be a mirror of the player in some way. But be it a fairground mirror or whatever, it's still a mirror.
Absolutely.
And there's still elements of that player dotted within that character. And when you put it like that, it is scary to think about that and yourself in such a way through this lens of some weird fantastical beast.
Well, so that's the thing, though, is that you don't have to think about it. And that's one of the biggest boons of this, is you can just create the character and play the character. And you don't even have to consider all of this other stuff that's going on. And then one day, something will happen at the table, and you will suddenly realize something about yourself. Who knows what it'll be? But it's that allowance of freedom in yourself and in your thought process that will generate those moments of insight that you don't need to share. You can certainly, if somebody at one of my tables suddenly has a deep and profound new understanding of who they are as a human, absolutely share that. Delightful. But a lot of these are just very private moments that are happening while you happen to be playing a game. And I think it's one of the things that makes the game so special, is that just by playing it, you can gain a better understanding not only of yourself, but of all of the other people at the table. And weirdly enough, the world in general, because you're dealing with themes at most tables that seem like they are just good versus evil. But all of the stuff that's happening in our day-to-day lives will creep in.
Yeah.
And you will suddenly be dealing with complex situations where, hey, yeah, you were sent by this kingdom to go kill an entire tribe of goblins, that have been wreaking havoc. But you get there and suddenly you discover that the goblins, have been here for 2,000 years, and the people are the actual interlopers.
Yeah.
What do? I very rarely see in anyone's campaigns anymore the whole, you've been sent to slay the dragon, and that is all. And once it is done, you have won. Everything is far more complex, because I think in large part, our world has become so much more complex over the last 40 years.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's almost a vehicle for, it can be, not in all cases, but it can be a vehicle for discussing those more complex issues. And I do like bringing elements of those into my campaign as well. A little switcheroo or a subversion here and there that players go and get there and go, oh, that is not what I was thinking was going to happen. Case in point, there's one coming up at the end of this chapter, which by the time this episode airs is probably finished and streamed and all that stuff. So, but long story short is they're going through a time loop at the moment, and it's very fun and very unique, and if I do say so myself, but it's very self-contained, very low stakes. It's a time loop, right? So if you die, it doesn't matter, time resets and you're back to where you were. So it's experimentation and whatnot. However, it's set in the past as well. They've gone back in time and a time loop, blah, blah, blah. The whole point is, when they have finally cracked the code of this loop and have gotten to the end, there is a huge moral quandary. This civilization that they're kind of interlopers in has destroyed themselves in their present through a civil war.
Ooh, yeah.
And they'll get the choice to be like, oh, we could stop that happening or not, which in of itself is quite an interesting choice. Do we want to change the course of history? Like, what the impact of that would be? To add a fly in the ointment, that civilization were doing some very morally questionable things.
Yeah.
So it's like, what's the price to pay? Do we save potentially countless lives from annihilation, even if their lives were maybe explicitly, maybe implicitly bad people? Like, that's what I'm trying to push.
I think that's one of the biggest issues that we face when it comes to just human beings in general. There are going to be a million different answers to that question. And there's going to be a million different types of calculus that go into deciding that. Like, I literally know people that would question this down to like, okay, on average, how many of those evil people are going to actually harm another person? You know, type things like
give me the latest census data.
Like,
who voted against? Like, give me a percentage.
And it is just it just, going down rabbit holes like that. But personally, I think that that's quality content because it forces characters to actually role play this, to have that discussion. And like, I know at my tables, I like to throw out a lot of different role playing opportunities, and all of my stuff is subversive. Like, it's never like the bad guy that you've been pointed at is never as simple as being the bad guy.
Yep.
And every choice that you make affects the world in general, because it's true. Every choice that we make, it might not affect the entire world, but it certainly affects our lives. And I think that, bring it back to quality, when it comes to, let's say, quality streaming of D&D content, of TTRPG content, it's my personal belief that while there are a few people out there that are just super into the crunchy rolls of it all, where it's just, well, did they have this feat? Because if they didn't have this feat, then they wouldn't be able to do that thing they just did. And they need to roll a 17 on this check, and they didn't. And then that roll got fudged, and that's unacceptable. There's that the vast majority of people, when they're watching, are there for the role play.
Yeah.
And that is if you are there, I understand that D&D started as a battle simulator, essentially. It was, you pick the right race, you pick the right class, you pick the right feats, and now you can defeat the things that you were sent out to defeat. But it has evolved. It has changed so dramatically, just like the world has. So I think that there's, like, when it comes to like quality tabletop content, that's really what people are looking for. That something can be considered quality if it does something very well, and or it does something new and exciting with the genre. That's, for me, when it comes to any art, and I do consider this an art. Like, I don't consider this a hobby. I don't consider this a game. It's the streaming, like, the game is the game, right? But the streaming aspect of it, and the podcasting aspect of it, and the actual playing of the game is no longer just a game. It is a semi-improvised, collaborative storytelling process.
Yeah, it is very much more an art than it is a science, for sure.
Yeah. And that's one of the things when you're looking for quality in any sort of art form, that's what you're looking for. You are looking for someone who does something unique, someone that does something truly astonishing or beautiful or insightful or is technically incredibly proficient. Like, that for me is like, it's the difference between, for instance, someone like Jane Fonda, who is just an amazing actress and goes in depth into her roles and is just astonishing to watch because she just loses herself in that role, as opposed to someone like Meryl Streep, who is incredibly technically proficient as an actor and does you can see every movement has been thought through. Every sentence has been meticulously crafted. And it's two completely different ways to come at the same art form. And both of them create gorgeous art from it. And for me, that's what I think quality is here in this space. It's what everybody should be striving for, is the ability to essentially improvise an entire campaign with their collaborators and create these moments. And that's one of the most beautiful things I think about the TTRPG space is it's not like you're watching a movie where it has to be a solid 2.5 hours of amazing acting and it's gorgeous and everything is perfectly pulled together. It's essentially sitting around talking about a thing for a while and then giving a moment. And then coming out of that moment and laughing or crying or doing all the things that you do, and then having fun for a little bit and then having another moment. You know, whether that moment is an incredible battle or a scene where you are unpacking all of the emotional craziness that comes from deciding the fate of an entire nation. You know, these are the things. So I feel like that's that sort of subversion, that sort of beautiful deception is a huge part of quality for TTRPGs and hopefully where we are headed with this whole scene.
Yeah, a couple of points there that I wanted to pick up on. First is I kind of don't want to do or have a popular actual play stream because I don't think I could bear those individuals you mentioned who are like pulling apart every misstep that I make because I shudder to think how many missteps there are. So,
okay, so first, let me jump on that. Let's talk about the quality of your audience.
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, my audience for this are top quality. That much I can tell you.
Absolutely, they are. I've never seen a better audience. Ping. It's one of those things where a quality audience is not something that you gain; it's something that you create. Making sure that when you are streaming, that there's somebody modding. Even if they're also playing or doing something else, somebody's just got like their eye on chat and they know what's going on and they can respond if somebody gets gross. You know, they can, cheer people on if they do something delightful, all of that kind of stuff. But also, being very liberal with the block button. That's huge. I think as you grow, this is certainly a lesson that I've had to learn. As you grow, you start interacting with a lot more people. And I've seen people who have accounts that are sort of my size and are just constantly talking about all of the awful people that keep contacting them and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, I don't get it because the people that I'm interacting with, like I'll run into a troll every now and again.
Yeah.
But even like with all the insanity that happened recently with the Supreme Court, Twitter was up in arms about everything, right? And it was just total insanity. And I kept seeing all over the place, everybody like, oop, I just lost like 100 followers. I just lost 300 followers. I guess the trash has taken itself out. And for me, I only gained followers. And I feel like a part of that is I've been very diligent about managing my audience and my community and making sure that I don't have a bunch of trolls in there, that I don't have a bunch of people that, are going to shout something into the void and then cause a lot of drama because I do not like it. Even if you look at like the major threads that we've put out, even when there is controversy on the thread, it always ends in a reasonable discussion because that is the community that I've created. So you can create a quality audience. Now, there will come a point where you can no longer maintain control over that. But for the vast majority of us, we will never. I mean, obviously, sometime tomorrow, I'm assuming about 3, I will go to like 10 million followers for some reason.
I think so. I think about 3:30. I think.
Oh wow! I can't believe that you were so mean. I'm gonna cry myself to sleep tonight. Yeah, but like for the vast majority of us, we'll be able to maintain that kind of audience. We will be able to maintain the people that we want without having to deal with a huge number of trolls. It just takes some energy. Like that quality, I sort of look at it like polishing a gemstone. It's going to take a long time for most of us. But if you can afford to get the gemstone cut into something perfect, great. And what that is that's like if you can afford to hire like a social media manager who will just create the audience that you want based on analytics.
Yes.
You know, like, it's great. Good for you. But for most of us, it's going to be polishing and sanding and polishing and sanding and polishing, sanding over many, 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 many hours. So,
and of course, you and I started talking for the listeners' benefit in one of those very, very many discussions you just mentioned on Twitter that eventually, I like to think, I hope, turned into a rather civil discussion, and then has brought us to this talk today, however many weeks later. So, you know, there are that is the beauty of having a high quality audience, I suppose, when you have me in it, I think is what I'm saying. So
no, that's the thing. I mean, I knew that it had become high quality when I met you. it's what's going on. I was a very roundabout way to get there, but yes, I'm glad you did.
Your check's in the post,
That whole thread was very interesting because that was one of those where, and this is something that I don't yet understand about Twitter, is the ability, I'm sort of starting to get a handle on it, the ability to read a sentence and then sort of discard words.
Yeah. Well, there's that meme photo of someone like, Twitter's so crazy, you can say you like strawberries and everyone says, what the fuck, why do you hate apples? And it's like, I never said I hate apples.
Yeah, it's so it's one of those things where that specific thread was all about literally, and it said in the initial post, hey, I'm sending this out to the Twitter hive mind. What do you think about this? And, you know, let's have a talk about this thing.
Brave.
And the replies, the vast majority of them, don't get me wrong, because I do have a great community out there. There's the vast majority of them were like, you know, I think it would be good for certain reasons. And then you might want to think about this. And then this is something that you should think about too. And then this. And that was great because it gave me all of these things that I hadn't yet considered, which is why I sent it out to the Twitter hive mind. Just, you know, hey, I know that as a human person, I have, you know, one brain. And there's a lot of other brains out there that can also be processing this information. So help me do that. And, you know, so the vast majority of it was great. And then there were some that were just, you know, one of the things that I see on Twitter a lot is there will be discussions where people are like, yeah, everything's great. It's good. It's fine. We love it. And the vast majority of your interactions are delightful. And then there'll just be a thing where you realize after the fact, you probably had a bad experience with this thing. And this is somehow a trigger for you. And I'm sorry that happened. But, and this is a big thing that I've had to say to many people in my life. I'm not your psychologist. I'm not your babysitter. And I'm not your parent. So this is not an appropriate conversation for us to have. Like, if this is, I am absolutely here to be a comfort and to be a friend, but I'm not going to be able to solve this problem for you.
Yeah.
That's a you and probably a you and a psychologist conversation.
I'm sorry you've had to have that conversation so many times. I think I'm fortunate enough that I've managed to dodge it for as long as I have.
I mean, you saw at the very beginning of this episode, like, I don't do small talk, which means you get to the meat of things very quickly. and because of that, and because I'm willing to have conversations with people about difficult topics, generally, like, that will turn into a conversation about something bad that has happened. And because I'm an empathetic human being, I will have that conversation too, but there will come a point where I'll have to be like, so I feel like I've done everything that I can here. Let's shift it. And when I say, like, it happens regularly, like, if you and I were to go sit down at any random bar somewhere, and you sort of like took 5 steps back from me, within 3 minutes, I would be having a conversation about, like, the deepest trauma that whoever sat down next to me has ever had. Because that's just That is just apparently the energy I give off.
Talking of those Twitter responses, it made me think it's a bit like, now I think about it, when you do those open questions, it does remind me a little bit of the notorious Stack Overflow, which is like originally a source for programmers to ask questions, hence the name. But now it's like Reddit. There's an overflow for everything. But that's notorious for being like, I want to do X. How can I do X? And the first 10 answers are like, don't do X, do Y. And that reminded me a little bit of your thread of like, I want to do this. And then some being like, why or don't. And it's like, well, that doesn't matter really. The fact that I'm asking implies that it's a thing that's going to happen, or at least, that's not what I've asked. I haven't asked, should I? I've asked how.
The whole point is to figure out what's the best way. Because I am under no illusion that I know the best way to do anything. Mm-hmm. I know that I'm very good at certain things. Great. That does not mean that I know best how to do everything, because there's constantly new and fabulous ideas out there. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, when it comes to your audience, I think this is something that definitely gets lost on Twitter, is there has to be also a place for forgiveness. Mm-hmm. If somebody is having a bad day on your Twitter feed, and most of the other days are good, totally fine. Mm-hmm. I get it. We are all entitled to a bad day or two. If it continues for a long time, that's a different issue. But most of the time, at least what I've seen, is it doesn't. There'll be something about this tweet that enrages this person for some reason that is probably deeply personal. Yeah. And it's like, okay, we now know that. Cool. And I've actually had a couple of situations on my feed where I see how somebody responds to something, and then I'll put out something similar and see them come in, and I will just be like, so no, not today. So we're not going to do this today. Please enjoy all of the other thousands of tweets that you can participate in right here on this very wall. So yeah, but that's I think part of the having a quality audience is actually responding to people and having real conversations with people. Mm-hmm. And for instance, for me, there have been a couple of moments where I have asked people, "Hey, this is a really interesting conversation. Let's have it off of this wall."
Yes.
And essentially when I'm saying that, it's not, oh, I gotta hide something. It is, hey, this is not what I want in my community. I don't want this level of vitriol in my community. You seem to be getting upset. And honestly, it is not my job to work you through or walk you through whatever is upsetting you, nor do I want it to be. I've got plenty of things to deal with in my own brain and do not need yours as well. But I'm happy to have a conversation in a space that is more conducive to rational conversation. Yeah. And for me, I learned a long time ago that psychologically speaking, only 8% of communication is the actual words we say.
Yeah.
And this, I guess, ties into quality of communication, which is incredibly important in the TTRPG space. How do you communicate with your players, with your audience, with your sponsors, all that kind of stuff? Mm-hmm. But what we all have to remember is that only 8% is the words that you say. If this were just written down in transcript form, it would not give you at all the same impression of what's going on as actually hearing this.
Yeah.
Because 92% of all communication is vocal tone, it's micro expressions, it's physical
body language,
your physicality, and your, all the other things that go, the nonverbal components of communication.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've seen people who I know or have rolled dice with or played games with or have had on the show before will do a tweet, and I'm like, oh man, people are going to interpret that in the wrong way.
Right.
That's not going to go down well. But it's only because I know what they're trying to get at from some past context that it's easy for me to understand. Whereas I'm just on face value, I'm like, oh yeah, that's that. People are going to vastly interpret that the wrong way.
And the thing that you have to remember as so this is something from a writing perspective, and technically Twitter is a writing. Is just the idea, like when you're writing a plot for TTRPG, or when you're writing a play, or when you're writing a novel or something like that, the thing that writers have to remember is that for every page that's there, you've got 1,000 pages in your head to explain what's on that page to you. You have an incredibly deep understanding of what's going on in each sentence. But the people that are reading it do not.
Yeah.
So it's important to remember that you have to give the context that you can, even though for you it already exists in your head, it does not exist for them.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that on Twitter, like especially, like most of the time it's real easy. Like if you add 1 or 2 words normally, that's great. Or just the right emote will let people know, oh, just this, this is fun.
That quality of communication, I love that point that you brought up there, because it is, as you opened it with, this is the game. TTRPGs are, it's the whole premise is communication between human beings, right? So any shortcomings in the communication side of things is gonna require a little bit more work, shall we say, to make sure things are going smoothly. So yeah, I'm just trying to think, like, how can, from a DM's perspective, I've slipped back, if you'll excuse me, into like my more mechanical brain of rather than this metaphysical brain. I've been like, how as a DM can you communicate things with more quality?
Well, there's a couple of tricks that I've learned as a DM, because communication at the table and quality communication at the table is incredibly important. I'm coming at this from a sort of performance space because we're an actual play on Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
And so it might be a little different than things that you're dealing with at the table. But for instance, the ability of the DM to help his players understand how they communicate and how they can communicate better. And that's really important when you're in a performance, because like I've got players where they give astonishing descriptions of what they're doing, incredibly detailed, and it's just delightful. But I can tell that they're sort of like, they're talking, trying to find that like truly beautiful moment.
Yeah.
That just, this is the description that is going to touch me and everyone around me, you know? And, you know, it's like with them, it's like, hey, let's figure out how to edit yourself.
Yeah.
So that instead of 15 sentences about casting magic missile, we can do that in 2. And you can get exactly the same level of impact that you want and the exact same level of description that you want, that does not then take us completely out of the fact that we are battling a giant monster.
Yes.
And then there are others where it's like, they want to focus on what their roles are and things like that. And so for the first one, I do a thing at my table where during the stream, we'll do favorite moments. So it is each stream at the end, what was your favorite moment of this stream? And audience participates, and we talk about all the fun we had that day. And then when we get off stream, I ask them each, what is one thing you can do better for next time?
Wow.
And that way, it is something that they recognize in themselves, something that they do want to change and alter and get better at doing, which we all have.
Yeah.
We should, every single person, it does not matter if you are Matt Mercer or, you know, like any other famous D&D personality. Every single one of us should be able to, at the end of a session, say, there is at least one thing that I did not do perfectly today.
I gotta jump in here, because I love to hear that, because it's something that you've articulated that I sometimes struggle to articulate, but it's definitely something I subscribe to. I always say there's a lot of discourse around, you know, everybody's game's their own. As long as people are having fun, that's fine, which is true. those two statements are true. However, I always say, okay, just because those are true, that doesn't stop you being able to have more fun. That's my way of saying, like, there is always something to improve. Because a lot of the time when people suggest improvements in the goodest of nature, can be met with like, well, it's my game and this is how I'm playing it.
So I'm gonna ask you, is there something that you could improve about that last sentence?
No, not at all. Almost definitely, and you would have thought I would have perfected it now after the amount of times I've said it or thought about it. But yes, there is for sure. Not that I could come up with an answer for you now.
Right. The reason that I do it that way is it allows them to bring up something that they are comfortable talking about. There's no forcing somebody to discuss something that they're doing that they don't want to. And very rarely have I had to like bring up something that was not already brought up.
Yes, of course, yeah.
But there are some sort of technical things that are important that we have to sort of remind people of because they get excited and things like that and they want to participate. A big one is talking over each other.
Mm-hmm.
And at a table, it's fine because most of the time, if you're in person, your human ears can separate out different human voices and figure out what's going on. And so if everyone's laughing and throwing out little quips and having a delightful time, it's great. Whereas on stream, it all gets converted into a digital medium and fed through one channel, which means it's just a sound wall. You cannot, there's nothing that can be pulled out.
You lose the nuance, you use the subtle changes in, pitch and tone and distance from the ears and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And so there are certain things that are just sort of technical things that you need to learn to do on stream, but can be very difficult if you're not like a trained actor. Mm-hmm. So that's one way. So that's if somebody, for instance, needs to edit themselves or something like that, that's something that you can bring up in that space. And you can then talk about it and say, hey, here's some suggestions that you can work on. And it's great because I have seen my players improve so dramatically over the course of the last year. It's amazing. And then, if it's somebody who like is sort of sitting back and not really talking much, stuff like that, that's something that you can discuss as well. That's like, hey, what can we do to make it easier for you to jump in when you want to? Mm-hmm. And then there's other techniques that I use, for instance, with like if somebody's very crunchy, loves talking about, and this is the thing that like personally I don't really like because I think it slows down combat so dramatically, is the person that wants to tell you and essentially celebrate the fact that they chose this feat and this class because now they can do this attack, and then because they have this, they can do the second attack, and because they have this extra thing, they can do this extra damage, and then because they have this, and they have to literally read you the description of every single thing that they're doing in that round, and then wait for you to essentially applaud them verbally for the fact they chose this, and then they will tell you the next thing that they are going to do. And the turn just takes forever. And for me, one of the ways that I've sort of gotten around that is on our channel, the vast majority of combats that we do are now narrative combat, where essentially the rules are you will not roll an attack roll. The only things that you roll are saving throws and damage dice. That's it.
Wow.
And sometimes you don't even roll damage dice. Sometimes you just tell me what you do. Or you tell me what you attempt, and I will tell you what the result was. And the rule is, in lieu of an attack roll, you have to tell me an amazing story about what you did. And if the story is interesting enough, you hit. And if it's not, you missed. And that's it. And it definitely takes some getting used to because people that want to talk to you about their feats and this attack and that attack and all that kind of stuff, their brain has been trained to give you these pieces of information instead of putting it together into a full story. And the example that I like to use is I had a character in one of my campaigns that an NPC, and mechanically what they did is they used their movement as a monk to get to within 5 feet of all the players. Then they attacked twice and used a key point to, or they attacked and they used a key point to do flurry of blows so they could attack multiple times.
Yeah.
And then they used another key point to jump out of there and use more movement to leave the situation. So that is not a super interesting story.
No.
Right? So what actually happened in the campaign was you see a hooded figure. He stands a couple dozen feet from you. You see a tail peeking out from the bottom of his cloak, swishing back and forth. He does not turn to face you. He simply gracefully, like orange and white liquid, bends over backwards and begins to do handsprings, faster and faster, approaching you. And before you can move, the final handspring launches him into the center of the group. He spins, and with the claws on both his hands and feet, he scratches each of you one time, landing in a ball. He springs back into action, climbing up the wall next to you and disappearing over the roof, all before you can speak. And that's the same story.
Yes.
You know, both of those are exactly the same story. One of them is just far more interesting than the other one, you know? So that's what narrative combat looks like in our space. And that's a way to help me get people off of the character sheet and into the actual story of what's going on. And we're actually developing a new technique right now called 10-second combat.
Okay.
Which is, if something is happening, I especially like to use this for like martial classes, because a lot of times it can be very difficult for people to give you new and exciting explanations of how this person punched somebody a couple times. So what I'll essentially do is I'll be like, okay, on your turn, we are now entering 10-second combat. And each of us will trade blows. And it doesn't matter how many it is, you will get to tell me in 10 seconds or less one movement that you make. It could be, I slide across the desk and I punch you in the face, you know, and then I would get to respond to that. Like, you know, I grab your arm and I flip the chair over, landing us both on our backs. And then now it's your turn. What do you do? And now it's my turn. What do I do? And the story gets faster and faster and faster and faster until somebody has nothing left. And in that moment, you've now hesitated and somebody has gone in to draw blood. And that's your turn in combat.
Wow.
And while, like, if you actually watch APs for any length of time, you know, everyone says, well, my combat doesn't take too long. Yes, it does.
Yeah.
If you actually time it, nobody's taking less than like 5 minutes on their turn. There's always questions before and questions after. Well, where are we positioned? What does this look like?
Can I reach this? Oh no, that changes things. Well, now I need to do this. And
and it's like, oh, let me look at my character sheet. And there's the whole and I'm like, we are not chanting right now. We are not in a Buddhist temple. Like, we're on an actual play. Let's get things moving, please. So in the time I can do a 10-second combat, I can do 3 10-second combats generally in the time it takes a normal actual play to do one turn.
Yeah, one single turn. Yeah.
But you don't have to use it all the time. And there are definitely days when I am not feeling great and I just don't have the brain power to make that happen. And then absolutely, we're going to roll a bunch of dice and our turns are going to take a while. And it's totally fine. You know, it's still, both of them are super fun. They're just very different things. One is built to be exciting for an audience, and one of them is built to be delightful for an individual, you know?
Yes. Yeah. Precisely.
I guess that would be our discussion of the quality of combat.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. I mean, that's a couple of episodes in of itself. Well, ironically, just as long as combat takes. I wanted to touch on the quality of the communication thing. One final thing I had a thought earlier on was about an often memed response to problems in the game or at the table out of game is speak to your players, which
absolutely.
is kind of has loads of value, kind of has no value because it's the answer to everything, and in of itself doesn't actually tell you anything useful, although it being still objectively true. Now, the thing I want to talk about there is that is the answer so often is because people are reluctant to have those conversations because the quality of communication required to have those conversations effectively is higher than you get when you're just talking shit with your mates or, at work or something. So that's why those conversations are quote unquote difficult, because you have to be like, hey, person, that behavior was inappropriate and this is an awkward discussion. And how can I communicate this in a way that isn't awkward and is effective and comes out the other side improved?
I think that is a problem that we're now going to jump into a world problem. This is something that is happening worldwide. At this point now, there seems to be this conflation of two concepts. Mm-hmm. The concept of a discussion and an argument. And there's so many situations nowadays that at least I've run into where you need to have a discussion with someone about something, and everyone involved is terrified because there's just the assumption of conflict.
Yes.
And the thing is that there's no need for conflict. There is not there is a need for conflict sometimes. The vast majority of times, though, the things that you're discussing, there's you're all trying to get to the same place. And I think there's many more reasons why this exists than we can discuss in the limited amount of time that we have. But essentially what happens is everybody in the situation gets anxious, their anxiety spikes, and suddenly nobody wants to have the conversation. And because the anxiety is spiking, the defense mechanisms come up, and that makes it more difficult to have the conversations. And because it's more difficult, that creates more anxiety, which makes it more difficult. And you get into this loop, right?
Yeah.
And because that loop exists in so many conversations, we are training ourselves to exist in that loop. So every conversation is suddenly anxiety ridden instead of it just being like, hey, and that's why I use what can you do better?
Yeah.
Because that is something where there is no confrontation at all. It is, you can say, I think I could do this better. Mm-hmm. And it includes the DM too. It includes me.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
What can I do better for next time? And I've gotten amazing suggestions from people at my table. I have gotten some not great suggestions as well, but
that's the cost of asking these questions, I'm afraid, is there's an overhead of
yeah. But I think that is, it's just important to check in regularly. Mm-hmm. And in a way, and what happens there is, for me, one of the questions that I will ask players when we're having more difficult discussions is, okay, is there any reason to believe, have I at any point behaved in a way that makes you believe I'm going to actively try to kill your character? That I'm going to actively try to destroy your experience at the table? And once you phrase it like that, one of the things that happens is they're required at that point then to take themselves outside of their own brain and really look at concrete things, which always helps alleviate anxiety and things like that, because anxiety is typically based on some loop that's happening inside your own psyche, that there is some sort of thing that your brain has latched onto that is grinding your gears to a halt. Mm-hmm. And when that happens, as soon as you take a step outside of your own head and start looking at things from somebody else's experience or from somebody else's point of view, suddenly it's not, your world is not consumed by this anymore. The world has broadened from 1 square foot of real estate, which is your skull, to many hundreds of square feet, which is the room that you now exist in.
Yeah.
And that anxiety can dissipate simply by truly participating with other people in those conversations. And I found that as soon as someone is required to step out of themselves for just a moment, it gives them enough perspective to then have that conversation. Doesn't work every single time, but like 90% of the time it works. And I've also found that when the only conversation that can be had is about the fact that people don't want to have the conversation is never actually going to happen, because all you're ever going to talk about is how much you are not looking forward to this conversation.
Yes.
And so if you can just stop that cycle in a similar way, which is just, okay, hey, is there a reason for you to believe that this conversation is going to be gross or upsetting or terrifying? Like, is there any reason to believe, based on this person, your history with this person, that something's going to go terribly wrong today, when in fact nothing has gone wrong yet in any of your conversations? And helping them put that historical perspective on it too helps, again, broaden the world, so that you're not just looking at this one thing that's making you anxious. You're looking at 100 things, 99 of which did not make you anxious.
Mm-hmm.
So there are all kinds of techniques that can be used to try to help smooth through conversations, but you're absolutely going to hit these moments where somebody is just, there's something happening. And this is where things get really treacherous, is you do not want to try to be a psychologist or a psychiatrist
not at
to
all,
your friends or to your players. You can be supportive and you can be just the most delightful human being you can. But even if you are trained to do this, it's totally inappropriate for you to do it in front of anybody else. You know, there's no situation in which you should be attempting to be the psychiatrist or psychologist to your friends or to your players.
Mm-hmm.
And when it gets to that point where literally communication cannot happen, it's important to shut down the conversation as gently and empathetically as you can. But if this person is unwilling to allow that, then at that point, that's a different discussion. That's a different, like, what is the quality of this person's relationship with you?
Mm.
And that's honestly probably the most difficult discussion that any of us will ever have about anything, is what is the quality of the relationship with your friends?
Mm.
What is the quality of your relationship with your family? What is the quality of your relationship with yourself? And they're not questions that we can answer easily or simply or quickly. And we can't answer them with a game. But one of the beautiful things about this is that we can explore them.
Mm. Well, usually at this point, I would say, is there anything we missed that we haven't talked about yet? But that was such a good bookend, and to a throwback to your opening statement, I don't want to ask that question because it would ruin the the perfect circle you've crafted.
Right. Well, this is, so if you like things like that, join me at my table, because that is how my storytelling goes. Like, it's one of those things where, as a storyteller, there comes a point where you understand, like, I didn't know that's where we were going to end when we started the interview. But when that became the conversation at the end of it, I could feel, okay, this is where this conversation should end. This is it. And it's the same thing with like an adventure, that there's, oh, here we are. This is where we are in this space. I understand. So even if you don't know, that's when you start, so that's where you're going to end. A really good DM, a good storyteller will feel that when it's happening. So yeah, I'm glad we could do that. Put a fabulous little button right there.
This is why I love doing the podcast. I've said it before and I'll say it again, is that so many times now, and this is one of the classic moments of the topic will be something that ostensibly means one thing, and then we talk about other still related things, but to take it in a completely new and unique and interesting direction, which is what's happened today. So I'm super stoked that we didn't talk about bloody combat again for 40 minutes or something, which it could have very easily happened, but
I mean, we spent a good 10 minutes on it.
No, it's nice to have, under the guise of quality, to have these kinds of discussions. So now I don't want to rob you of that opportunity. If you did really want to say something else, you can do.
No.
You good? Yeah,
no, that's the thing. I literally could feel it was I could feel that the time was getting close to up.
Yeah.
But there was also, I was like, there was probably another 2 or 3 minutes that I could have done sort of really wrapping this up in a very philosophical bow.
Thank you. I was looking at the clock and was like, he's going. He's on one. I'm going to let him finish. Talking of joining you at your table, where can we find you? Why don't you do some promotion?
Well, let's see. Hold on. Let me get into my DM voice. All right. Well, you can find me over at Play Nerd Allies on Twitch, where we do 2 actual plays each week set in our homebrew world, the Patchwork Planet. The gods destroyed all of their planets, and the God of Wisdom grabbed a shard from each one to save a little piece of each. And now all of those different groups have had to learn how to live together. Come and see us in our season 3 called The Reef of Glass. In addition, every Friday on our Twitch channel, we do Magnificent Mythologies, where we bring on BIPOC and Alphabet Mafia creators. They give us a little story, and we turn that into a full-blown one-shot adventure that we then pay for the art and the layout and hand it back to the creators, who then own 100% of the IP. Because at the Foundation for Inclusivity in Gaming, our goal is to literally change the face of the TTRPG scene by elevating BIPOC and Alphabet Mafia creators in every way we can. On Sundays every other week, I'm joined by the Healer DM, also known as Connor. He is delightful. And we do world building for the Patchwork Planet, which we will be releasing hopefully sometime in the next year as a full campaign setting. In addition to that, I am the manager of the Rolling Together stream team. If you just go to twitch.tv/teams/rolling together, you can find all of the fabulous people that are involved in our Rolling Together stream team. We are incredibly diverse and delightful, doing all kinds of actual plays, world building, writing, streams, all having to do with TTRPGs. And finally, there is the Foundation for Inclusivity in Gaming, which you can find at figforall.org. There, we set out to help, as I said, change the face of the TTRPG scene, making sure that we are elevating those who have been ignored for many, many years now. We've got all kinds of programs, and if you'd like to donate to FIG to help other streamers, please feel free to do so. There's a button right there on the website. Oh, and you can find all the links to this all over at Twitter. You can search for us under Play Nerd Allies or at Allies Nerd. Yeah, and I will be appearing on a bunch of different shows and campaigns over the course of the next couple of months. I'm working with Quest Junkies, with Black Girl Mage, with Dead Aussie Gamer.
Oh, yeah.
So I'll be around. You'll see me.
Had Dead Aussie Gamer on the show before in the past, funnily enough.
Oh, fabulous. Yeah, Michael's great.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, well, all that's left to say, in which case, is thank you ever so much, Cyle, for your time today. What an insightful and interesting discussion we had.
Yay! Thank you.
The audience does typically applaud at this point, so that makes sense this year. I've just pictured all these people in their cars now listening and being like, "No, we don't." What? Like, shut up. So yes, thank you so much for joining us today, Carl. Thank you everybody for listening at home. All the links Carl's just gone through will be in the episode description. I'll put the link tree at the top so you can just click on that one if it's easier for everybody. Otherwise, thank you all for listening and good night. And now it's time for the Patreon shoutouts. Thank you to Joe from the Fourth Leg podcast. Again, 2-time guests of the show. And the Fourth Leg is a TTRPG podcast all about giving new GMs a leg to stand on. Please go and check them out at the Fourth Leg on Twitter. Thank you to Optional Rule, a 2-time guest of the show and a very insightful and knowledgeable source of information. Please check them out at www.optionalrule.com. Huge thank you to a great friend of the show, Matthew Perkins, who's out there making hilarious and educational Dungeons & Dragons content. Please go and check out his stuff at matthewperkins.net, where you can find links to all of his socials and all of his content, including his own Patreon, which I would very much encourage you to check out. Thank you to Matt Street at mpstreet88 on Twitter for supporting the show. If you need support running your personal or business schedule, head to virtualtimehustle.com or on Instagram to make that difference between should do and done. Boss it better with that essential time you've been searching for. If you would like to support what we do and get 4 shout-outs a month, head over to patreon.com/thinkingcritically, or you can just buy me a coffee at ko-fi.com/thinkingcritically